Now, talking about the military causes, we just talked about how there were new social laws introduced which turned the society against the Britishers. Then the religious interference was not liked by the people. Then we also see that as different sections were turning against the Britishers, the peasantry, the farmers, zamindars, native rulers, the Indian social classes, the normal society, we see that even the soldiers also turned against the Britishers. So there were several military causes also responsible, which led to this revolt of 1857. So let us see what were those causes which turned the soldiers against the Britishers. The first is discontentment among Indian soldiers. What is discontentment? Dissatisfaction. They were unhappy. The Indian soldiers were really unhappy with the British rule. Let us see why so. The Indian soldiers, they were paid much lower salary than the British soldiers. They were treated unfairly. So we see the Indian soldiers, they were not given equal treatment as the British soldiers here. The British soldiers, they were given high posts, they were given promotions, they were given very good salaries, while Indian soldiers, they were discriminated against. They were not given promotions, they could never rise to high posts, they were not given salary equivalent to that of the British soldier, they were given lower salary just because they were Indians. The living quarters, the food, the allowances, whatever was given to the Indians was of inferior quality than that of the British. Even when, both there was an Indian person and there was a British soldier at the same post, even then the Indian soldier was paid less than that of the payment given to the British soldier. So, this discrimination was not liked by the Indian soldiers, that in their own country they are being treated unequally and they are being given lower salary and lower inferior conditions to live in. So, this was not liked by the Indian soldiers, and there was a lot of anger among them against the British rule. Then another cause was the Burmese Wars of 1824 and 1852. What happened during these wars? Indian soldiers, they were required to cross the sea and go to these regions for the war. Now, according to Indian customs, if a person crosses the sea, he loses his caste. It was forbidden, it was not allowed in our religion to cross the sea. So when during these wars the Indian soldiers they were asked to cross the sea, go abroad, so it was not liked by the Indian soldiers that this is an attack on their religious beliefs, because when they had to come back, then they had to go through the entire ceremony to purify themselves. So they did not like these kind of impositions put on them, where they were required to act against their religious beliefs and customs. So the Indian soldiers, they turned against the British. Another cause was foreign service allowance or bhatta. We see whenever the Indian soldiers, they were sent on war or a battle to far off regions, to foreign lands, they were given some additional allowance, or which was called bhatta, because they are being sent to far off place, so they were giving some additional allowance, money you could say, or some form of allowance was given to them. But now this practice was also put an end to, because it was adding to the expenditures. So the British put an end to this practice, and these soldiers, they were being sent abroad also, but they were not being given any extra foreign allowance or the bhatta. So again this added to the anger of the Indian soldiers who did not like this. Then there were several other reasons as well. The Indian sepoys, that is the soldiers, they were not promoted to higher posts. They were not given a raise higher than the level of the subedar. So no matter if an Indian entered into the army, no matter how qualified, how hardworking he was, he would never be given a promotion to reach above the level of subedar, at the maximum who could reach the level of subedar only. All the higher posts were reserved for only the British soldiers. They were, so we see that Indian soldiers, they were neither given promotions nor high posts nor good allowances, food and all. So this discrimination was not liked by them. Indian soldiers were also not allowed to wear religious or caste marks. Sometimes your religion requires you, like for example, Sikhism, to wear the pagadi, to carry, those there are certain marks and all that each religion asks you to follow, and you are supposed to follow, carry those marks. But these marks were not allowed by the British people. They were not permitting the Indian soldiers to continue with their religious beliefs. So this was not liked by the Indian soldiers, and this led to widespread anger and resentment among the Indian sepoys, that is the Indian soldiers, against the British. So we see basically these are all the general causes that were happening which turned Indian people against the British. They did not like the new laws, new ways, interference, the discrimination practiced by the Britishers against the Indians. So eventually, this anger piled up and eventually it burst out in the form of the Great Revolt of 1857. I hope all these causes are clear to you. So, students, we have already studied about the political, economic, social, and religious and military causes which led to the Great Revolt of 1857. Now we will come to the immediate cause. So till now we were studying the causes which led to anger in different sections of the Indian society. But what was the immediate cause which started the rebellion and eventually it spread to different parts of the country, including different sections of the society who were as it is dissatisfied with the British rule in India. So let us see what was the immediate cause that led to the beginning of this Great Revolt of 1857. So there was this major incident which gave spark to this 1857 revolt. What was that? It was the introduction of a new kind of rifle in the army. And this rifle was known as the Enfield rifle or the Pritchett rifle. Now, what was this rifle? Why did the introduction of this rifle lead to the Great Revolt? Let us see that. First of all, why is it called Enfield rifle or the Pritchett rifle? It was named Enfield rifle after the place in England where this rifle was manufactured. So Enfield was a place in England where this rifle was manufactured, so it is known as Enfield rifle. Why is it known as the Pritchett rifle? Because Pritchett was the person who designed this rifle. That is why this name Enfield rifle or Pritchett rifle. So the introduction of this rifle became the immediate cause of the Great Revolt of 1857. So now what was the problem with this rifle? This new rifle, it used a cartridge which was covered with the grease that was made with the fat of cows and pigs. Now, if this rifle was introduced in the army, it was to be used by the soldiers. Now, in this rifle, they had to load the rifle with these cartridges, and this cartridge had a greasing of which was made with the fat of cows and pigs. Now the sepoys, that it's the soldiers, they were required to bite off this grease wrappers. They had to remove these grease wrappers before they could load this cartridge. Okay, so for the loading of the cartridge in the rifle, they needed to remove this wrapper which was greased with the fat of the cows and pigs. Now the problem lied here that it hurt the religious sentiments of the Hindus and Muslims. Why so? Because we know that Hindus, they considered cow as sacred animal. Hindus prohibit eating of cow meat. Beef is against the religious sentiments of the Hindus. Cow is considered as a very sacred animal whose meat should not be consumed. So it is against the religious beliefs of Hindus. Similarly, the meat of pig is considered a taboo by Muslims. Muslims strictly prohibit consumption of pig meat. Now these Britishers, they went on to introduce these new rifles which had this greasing made of particularly of the fat of cows and pigs. Now, this is what led to the anger among the Hindus and the Muslims in India. That why did they particularly introduce such rifles which had the grease of cows and pigs? It hurt the religious sentiments of the Hindus and Muslims in the army. They refused that they are not going to use this rifle which would require them to hurt, which would hurt their religious sentiments. So we see that the soldiers, they got very angry with the introduction of this new rifles, and they stood up in revolt against the British. They saw it as a disrespect shown to their religious sentiments, and they straight away refused to use these rifles. Mangal Pandey, you must have heard the name. Mangal Pandey was the first soldier who straight away forward refuses to use these rifles, and he stands up in revolt. He's later on hanged, we will study. And this is what led to the beginning of this revolt. Eventually all the soldiers, they come out against the Britishers, and that is how the Sepoy Mutiny or this Great Revolt begins. It begins as a Sepoy Mutiny. The Britishers, they remember in the beginning, the Britishers said that it was just a small Sepoy Mutiny, the soldiers' revolt. It started off as a soldiers' revolt, but eventually it spreads to many regions. It goes on to include many sections of the society, the zamindars, the peasantry class, the artisans, craftsmen. Everyone goes on to join and become a part of this revolt of 1857, and it turns out to be the first war of independence. So the immediate cause was this introduction of this rifle, the uses of which led to the hurting the sentiments of Hindus and Muslims, particularly the soldiers. So this particular incident became the immediate cause of the Great Revolt of 1857. You can have a look at the rifle that was introduced. It was this Enfield or the Pritchett rifle which became the immediate cause of the Great Revolt of 1857. So these are all the causes that we have studied. The reason why the Indians, the different section of Indian society, stood up against the British rule in 1857. Next, we will study the topic how does this revolt begin, at which place, and it spreads to different part of the country, especially in North India. Who are the different leaders who take up a stand against the British rule? Who wins the revolt? What is the result of this war? So we are going to study in detail the result of this revolt of 1857, popularly known as the First War of Independence.